Hello, this is David Webster, citizen journalist for the Belmont Journal, with a special report with representatives from two of Belmont's houses of worship. The effects of the COVID-19 virus pandemic are changing our lives globally, nationally, and locally. Among the many places in Belmont to be affected are our houses of worship. In the absence of gathering for regular worship services, what are the churches and temples in Belmont doing to provide connection, help, and comfort during these times that can be particularly stressful? Here with me today are ministers from two of the houses of worship here in town. First is Joe Zarro, pastor of Plymouth Congregational Church. Welcome, Joe.
Hi.
And also Chris Jablonski, minister of the First Church of Belmont Unitarian Universalist Church. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So I'll start with Reverend Joe Zarro. What have you been doing at Plymouth Congregational Church since becoming restricted in your abilities to meet regularly and come together as a congregation on Sunday mornings?
Well, our last two Sundays have been exclusively online. We are using Zoom, like we are right now for this interview. The reason our church went with Zoom was it allows people to do their joys and concerns. One of the important parts of our worship service is we share our prayers together and pray for each other. And there's the interactivity online in Zoom that was important to us. There was also the ability for people to participate from different locations, so we can have a lay reader from their house. And actually this Sunday, I will be officiating worship from here. But the last two Sundays, a small group of us have met at the church, keeping appropriate social distance. And that's been the music minister, me, and last week was a song leader and a deacon. And so the deacon is helping with the technical end of things. The song leader sings along to the hymns so that there's a little bit of familiarity there. And the music leader plays the piano and the organ that is in the sanctuary. Last week, we were even able to include a time with the children where a couple of the families showed their video of their kids, and we did a little show and tell where they showed a couple of projects that they did when in quarantine, home from school. So that's how we've been approaching Sunday morning. It's going to get a lot more interesting for Palm Sunday and Easter. So this Sunday is just a typical Sunday. It's the fifth Sunday in Lent, but next Sunday is Palm Sunday, the last Sunday of Lent, a very important Sunday in the life of the church where we usually have palm branches and do a processional, and obviously processional is out of the question. And then next week is Easter, and we are looking for creative ways to share the news of resurrection and rebirth, even in a time of isolation and fear.
Thank you. Thank you. Sounds like very resourceful adaptations. And Reverend Jablonski, can you tell us a little bit what's happening Sundays at the First Church?
Yeah, I obviously wish none of this was happening, but I'm so grateful that really early on, we set up a response team, a special task force with some members of our board and some medical advisors and some scientists who told us pretty early on that this was probably going to be happening. And so we started working on what would it look like and what would Sunday mornings look like. And I'm really, really blessed to have an incredible team that I work with there at First Church. And actually two of my staff are filmmakers and videographers and audio technician type people. And so we've actually gone a slightly different route. We have been creating YouTube worship. So anybody can go on, just search for First Church Belmont, and there's a whole bunch of resources, worship services, but then also weekly messages from me. And then there's a special kids show where I tell a story, and then kids write in. There's a little mailbag, and my kids run around, and they're all kind of nutty, and it's very sweet. So we've been sort of balancing both opportunities for people to connect with, the staff and one another. And then we've been doing a lot of Zoom for meetings and small group ministries. So we have lots of different ways that people are connecting live, because that's been so helpful. It's been so beautiful to see one another and see one another's faces and just be able to hear how everybody is and just to check in. And we wanted people to be able to come back to the worship services and share them with their friends. And we've heard some really sweet stories. There's actually one family that worships simultaneously with their family in Germany, so that they all sync up a time when works for them, even with the 6-hour difference, and they kind of worship together for the first time. And we have some people who, for a couple different reasons, have either moved away or now are in assisted living homes. And so now they feel like they're able to participate in the life of the church in a way they haven't for a while. So again, while I wish this wasn't happening, there definitely have been some interesting creative opportunities that have come along with it. So,
if I could
There's
echo,
a lot of other activities go on at church other than Sunday morning. So, and that's has to be effective. Usually both of these churches are beehives of activity. Starting with you, Reverend Zara, how has it affected other things going on other than on Sunday mornings, beyond Sunday morning?
well, I do want to echo what Chris said about how the online format reaches people in a different way, and people who maybe had been participating on Sunday morning before. And it's been really rewarding to see different people who maybe have moved away, or there's a young couple I did a wedding for who now live in Bermuda, and they were there at our last worship service, and it was pretty amazing. And I'm a little embarrassed it took a national emergency for us to get online. And so it's ministry we plan on continuing after this. Wednesday nights, I've been hosting a Zoom prayer call, and this is a chance for people in the congregation. And typically 10 to 15 people will be on this call, and we'll share updates and pray for the different people in the congregation, and read a couple pieces of scripture and a poem. Our committees and boards meet online, and I think the biggest ministry that's going on right now is we have a ministry called Call to Care, and this is a ministry we've had for years, and this is a ministry that helps people who are dealing with difficult times, and whether medical diagnoses or things like that. And so that group, along with me and the deacons, we are coordinating rides or groceries or things that are needed for folks in our community who are vulnerable and need to stay in. And I've been really touched with how much people are willing to give of themselves, and how responsible so many people in the congregation are being, that if they have a sickness in their family they're staying in, or if they're above a certain age they're staying in and really listening to the advice of the experts. I would say that another thing I've noticed has been when I call in on my seniors, how many of them have neighbors and friends who are doing the same thing, and how much of that is happening organically in our communities as well. One of my parishioners, she told me, "Oh, there's a man upstairs, and he's always been so nice to me, and whenever he goes out, he always asks if I need him to bring anything." And so it's good to know that our communities are sticking together.
I know the First Church in Belmont is usually has activities, coffee houses, seminars, everything going on. Anything you want to say about the Belmont community, or the impact that's had on other activities at the First Church?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest changes. Obviously, was so many of the programs all just came to a screeching halt. We always planned so far in advance, and so many opportunities for people to gather. And a lot of the groups, a lot of the committees and task forces have, like Joe was saying, really just done a relatively seamless switch to meeting online and planning. And I think a lot of the events are either postponed, indefinitely, or just canceled. But there is a lot of connection going on. There's a lot of support going on. We've sort of taken a slightly different tack where we have so many committees and groups, and those end up being support mechanisms for each other. But again, a really incredible group of volunteers sliced up all our many people into neighborhood unity groups. So we're sort of reaching out to families of eight to 10 families and getting them all connected to each other just in the event that anyone faces crisis or challenge, and so that there's little feedback loops and people will do things for each other. And that's been taking off. But I also have been really amazed every time I check in, every time I kind of put a call out and just gather any slice of the community, how many people are already doing that for one another. And I was just out front with my 4-year-old daughter doing some sidewalk chalk art with some little supportive messages in front of our house for people. And a woman walked by and she said, "Have you been doing this all around town?" And I said, "No, this is the only one that I'm doing, but so many people are doing things like that." So again, I wish this wasn't happening, and there's so many beautiful moments that are coming out of it, and opportunities to show up for one another. I mean, we also have, every time I gather with people, it's also shocking to me how sick people are. I mean, the sickness is really spreading and it's really hitting so many people. So sidewalk chalk art beauty is helpful, and there's just the lived reality of, you know, people needing groceries and people needing support and people just needing, like Joe was saying, to hear somebody call on the phone and, you know, to hear somebody show up like that. So my little 4-year-old, when that lady passed, she said, "We're making art so people feel better." And the lady said, "Well, it's working." And so that's, you know, there's lots of opportunities to do things like that. I think it was it Doris Day? I'm going to quote it wrong, but I think Doris Day said the purpose of the church is to make it easier for people to do good. And I see that happening over and over and over again. So much of what we're doing is just making it easier for these mechanisms that I think we're naturally drawn to, showing up for one another and supporting one another. But somehow we forget in the rush of our normal lives, but this is an opportunity to remember and return to it. So
Reverend Joe, what any thoughts you have on the needs of the congregation or responses or particular incidents you've seen among the congregation or people in Belmont?
Well, I think, you know, I think a lot of congregations, mine included, are anxious about how long this is going to last and what it's going to mean for our communities. And it's one thing for us to rally in the first few weeks, and it's another, you know, a couple months from now, what is our financial situation going to be like? What is our attendance situation going to be like? And, you know, I think the real thing that's hanging over our heads is just how bad will this get here in the greater Boston area? How much will it touch our congregation? I think we're all worried about the lives of people in our congregation, especially the most vulnerable people in our congregations. And so I think there's a lot of anxiety and fear about the future. And I think the biggest need is a need for hope, a need for prayer, a need for courage, and to have faith that we will meet this challenge, and that even if people in our congregation die of COVID, even if it hits Boston as hard as it's hitting New York now, that we're going to get through it together, and that we have the resiliency and the resources as a community and as a congregation to weather the storm. And I feel very blessed to be at Plymouth Church. I've been serving the church for over 6 years now, and it's a really wonderful group of people, and it's a very strong congregation from a commitment standpoint. And I know a lot of my colleagues have been, at first they had folks who didn't want worship to be closed, and this is bringing up a lot of conflict in their congregations, and I'm very grateful that so far we're really sticking together. And I think the biggest need right now is to trust in God and keep faith. And that's hard because it's not, it's not getting more tests, it's not more ventilators, it's not something tangible that you can point to and say, we did it. It's something spiritual. And I think it's what we all need, whether we're religious or not, whether we attend a house of worship or not. I think we all need that emotional and spiritual connection to a faith or a hope or a trust that we will get to the other side of this together.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think, to me, I appreciate what you're saying about the marathonness of it. I think there's this immediate crisis response, and we all go to some of our natural tendencies, and mine's a little bit like, I got this, like, let's just do more, And I think I'm really lucky to have some wise colleagues who work with me who just say, okay, we need to pace ourselves. We need to help pace our leaders. We need to help really imagine this, like, what if this is going to be many, 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 many weeks? And I think so many of all of our people have really distinct circumstances. Like, so many people, so many of parents with young children are now trying to, be productive and work at home I have 3 kids around the house, and everybody's been really resilient and really creative, and it's definitely fraying. It's the week 2, and if this is going to be, 8, 10, however many weeks, that's hard. And so being able to focus on what gets us through, setting up these relationships now, and setting up these spiritual practices now, really trying to return, trying to have a practice of settling, trying to have a practice of connection, and trying to have a practice of mindfulness and paying attention. One of really wonderful member of the church who also is the head of a school not too far away, she was doing a little video to her students, and she was telling the students that it's a great moment, it's an elementary school, a great moment to pay attention to all the feelings that you're having. Because I know for myself, it's like every day there's so many different feelings that come and that go. And I'm not someone who's given to a lot of anxiety or panic, and still, grocery shopping and just being around people, there's just so much, and it's such an intense time. So to be able to have practices that ground us, to be able to have practices that reconnect us and remind us of, that we're held, and that remind us that there is, one of the first things that I ended up sending out to the community, again, this was a friend and colleague who said this, but when she was first diagnosed with ALS, she talked to a friend of hers who had survived really difficult cancer. And what the person said, the cancer survivor said, was to pay attention to all the horses in your stable. That ALS is now one very large horse in your stable, but there's a bunch of other horses in your stable. And so many of us are starting gardens too, and many of us are cleaning up our basements and whatever else it is, and to not be entirely focused on this one large, complicated horse in the stable. And so that's partly why we're sharing out a lot of opportunities, like Joe was saying, for inspiration and for hope. And that's why we're cranking out sort of a crazy amount of these videos. Anything that we can do that helps. I talk to people who are listening to old sermons and listening to things, in a loop. And then it's anything that helps get us through this moment. So I'm very, very, very proud of the way that both my staff and leadership and really the whole community is sort of meeting this. And we're really lucky, like Joe was saying, we're part of this Belmont Religious Council. We have so many great communities here in town who are all rallying to this in so many ways. So.
Thank you. Those are very good stories and sharing, and hopefully helpful to a lot of people. And on the worship, in some ways, the virtual worship services may present an opportunity for remote relocations, people that have a hard time getting out of their house, or far away, or just not motivated to go to church or temple on the weekends. Are you finding that there is some ease and anonymity of logging on to Zoom as opposed to, dressing up and going out on
Yeah, I mean, the way that we're sharing these videos, there is the utmost of anonymity because people are watching it in so many different ways, and people are continuing to watch it as the weeks kind of go on. And I think there is definitely a lot that this makes possible, and there really is, I think, and like Joe was saying, we will continue to cultivate some kind of online presence like this. And there really is just something to coming together, as much as we will be honoring all this social distancing, there is something to the social closenessing, and that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I can't wait for it to be back. But yes, there's a lot that this makes possible.
Yeah, my hope for this is that not only will it show us what's possible through technology, it'll help us also appreciate how there is no substitute for in-person contact and in-person worship, in-person I've talked to a lot of people on the phone and a lot of people on video chat over the last 2 weeks. And the few times I've had a chance to talk to another person in real life, I've noticed how much different it is and how much is missing right now. And I was listening to a former Surgeon General, and I can't remember his name, but he served during the Obama administration. And he was talking about the epidemic of loneliness, and he just wrote a book about it. And the way loneliness kills, and the way that isolation and loneliness is really an epidemic in our country before this. And so we have to do it now in order to save lives and in order to slow the spread and flatten the curve. But my hope is that one of the things that comes out of this is we realize how important that social connection is, that we don't be afraid when we get the all clear to gather again, and that we address that epidemic of loneliness we had before this, and that we realize those of us who have been socially connected and now are experiencing that loneliness can have better compassion and empathy for those on the margins and those who haven't been socially connected, and we can really address the isolation and the loneliness that is a problem at all times in our country.
Yeah, I love that. Sorry to interrupt you. I also, I think the other thing that's so different, one of the reasons we're doing the YouTube thing is just to keep the music really vibrant and beautiful and clear. And there is just nothing like being 8 feet away from one of these incredible singers we have who are just like pouring themselves out into some solo, or being enveloped in the power of an organ, or surrounded like 4 people in a family who are doing a quartet. Like there's just really, that is irreplaceable. The sensation, the experience of the music that I know we do is such a big part of who we are at First Church. So that's another thing where we can do our best to share a facsimile, but there's really just nothing like being there together live, singing hundreds of people's voices all singing at the same time. There's really no approximating that with boxes on a screen, much as I love all of this technology.
So let me ask you to wrap up here with, if you think about if there's any message that you want the people in Belmont to feel, that those particularly feeling isolated or challenged by the period, or with the health threats and the social isolation. Do you have a message for people here in Belmont? Let's start with whichever one wants to.
Sure. I think to me it's, to know that we're held, to know that we're connected, and to not be afraid to reach out. I think I've been really surprised, or not surprised because I know people, but so many people think, like kind of I did, what I mentioned before, like I can get through this, we have enough groceries in the basement and I can get through this. And there's nothing as sweet right now to me than being able to show up for one another and being able to do anything for one another. So I think there's a lot of people who are ready to help. Your neighbors. We would do anything. One of my dog's chew toys got on the top of our garage, and we were thinking of all sorts of fun ways to get it down with my kids. And my neighbor came by, and he just climbed up on a fence, and we did it together. And I think we're ready, and we're hungry for that kind of connection. So if you need any kind of support, reach out to your neighbors, reach out to your community. We're gonna get through this together, especially as it gets harder over these next couple of weeks, because it seems like it's going to get significantly harder over these next couple of weeks. So it'll matter even more that we reach out and that we remember that we have one another.
Reverend Joe, you have any final words or thoughts or messages for the people in Belmont?
Yes, to echo Chris, don't be afraid to reach out to the houses of worship. We are eager to help people. And you don't have to be a member of our congregation. It's okay to find us now and to reach out now. Don't feel like you had to have a pre-existing relationship with the church in order to jump online or to write the minister and ask for counseling. This is what we do all the time. And this is our mission and our purpose. In Christianity, we have the great commandment, which is to love God with all your strength, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And I often emphasize that there are three aspects to that. There's loving God, there's loving your neighbor, and there's loving yourself. And during this time, it's important to really pay attention to all three of those. It's okay to be angry with God. It's okay to wonder why God is allowing something like this to happen, and why there's so much suffering in this world. But keeping your connection with God and keep talking to God is one of the ways it's going to help you get through this. And loving your neighbor, we talked a lot about that and how to do it. And finally, the thing I really want to close on is that loving yourself. That this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to take a lot of care for yourself, and it's going to take a lot of compassion for yourself. There are going to be days where you don't do as well as other days, and you just need to forgive yourself and forgive that inner critic in your head. And you can't, it's no good to love your neighbor as yourself if you're not loving yourself very much. So make sure you love yourself and make sure you're precious to this community, to God. And if you're in the vulnerable population right now, think about all the people who are staying home, who are washing their hands 30, 40 times. The thing they're thinking about most is protecting their neighbors and making sure that this doesn't spread and doesn't kill more people. We're willing to lose work. We're willing to cancel our plans. We're willing to do all this to care for one another. And so you're precious, and please remember that and take care of yourself.
Thank you both, Chris Jablonski and Reverend Joe Zall. Thank you very much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.